Hello, 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 hello. Check, check, check. It says I'm live, so hopefully y'all can hear me, see me. I chose a different decrepit subway because I don't have Lee's background. So there you go. You get a little bit more greenery in mine. I hope that y'all can see me, hear me, etc., etc. This is my first time doing it myself. Uh, so bear with me here. I'm Eleanor Goldfield. For those of you who are wondering what the hell is going on right now, I haven't killed Lee and stored his body in a basement or anything. He's fine. He's in Tibet. He'll be back. So I am doing the show in his stead to try and keep the algorithm gods happy and to hang out with y'all because I actually enjoy it. So here we are. I have a lot of topics for you today. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the ongoing genocide because I feel like we kind of need to keep talking about that. Also going to be talking about whether any of this is really quote unquote new in terms of US empire. Going to be talking about the upcoming election that I feel like is soon-ish. I'm going to be talking about, if we get to it, some of the horrors at the border. If y'all know me, you know that I'm not the good news fairy. So there's not a lot of that coming up, but hopefully we can have a good time hanging out anyway. So, yeah, please come on in, thumbs up, all of the good things that Lee usually tells you to do, and I will just dive in here. I'm going to start with a story. That's not the right button. That's going to happen a lot here, y'all. Just bear with me here. Okay. Da, 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 da. Okay, so in typical, fascists are going to fashion. Israel has killed 5 more journalists in Gaza. And this was just recently. Over 176 media persons have been killed since October 7th. Those numbers, I mean, it goes back and forth in terms of which numbers to look at. A lot of people are undercounting. I'd say the number is probably a lot higher. There's a Palestinian media collective that has the number right around 170, 180. So it's hard to really count in times like these. But just recently on Sunday, so today is Tuesday, October 29th, that we're live streaming right now, 5 journalists were murdered on Sunday. This was coming from the government media office in Gaza. And basically they were targeted, as Israel is known to do. And of course, Israel always says, oh, well, we don't target journalists, right? Just like you don't target civilians and you don't target children and all of that nonsense. But what I wanted to highlight here is that right before these 5 were murdered, Israel actually called out, kind of like calling their shot in a really dark way. 6 journalists, labeling them as terrorists, saying that they were going to go after them. And what happened was, the IDF claimed that these 6 journalists are fighters for Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Because you can just say things like that, right? You don't need to back them up with anything. That's how that works, right? And indeed, this is coming from Time magazine, right? So this is not some leftist rag that I'm quoting from. This is Time magazine that says, quote, the IDF says its allegations are based on documents seized in Gaza, which detail the names, ID numbers, and ranks of members of the armed wings of the militant groups. Because you know what I often find makes it through nonstop bombing for over a year is like little ID cards that tell you what kind of affiliation you have in some terrorist group. I find that that's what makes it through an entire year of genocide, just sitting out there for the Israeli forces to find. Time goes on to say, Time could not independently confirm the authenticity and accuracy of the documents. No shit. Al Jazeera has rejected the allegations and described the documents as fabricated. Also, no shit. So RSF, which is the Reporters Without Borders, Sans Frontières, that's why it's RSF. They're French. It's cool. RSF examined Israel's targeted killing of two other Al Jazeera correspondents, Ismail Al Ghul and Rami Al Rifi, who were killed by a drone strike in their car shortly after reporting live from a location near the family home of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh, who had been assassinated in Iran earlier that day. Israel asserted that Al Ghul was a, quote, Hamas military wing operative and terrorist. The RSF investigation into this noted numerous inconsistencies, which is a really nice journalistic way of saying utter bullshit, in Israel's evidence, including the assertion that Al Ghul received a military rank in 2007 when he would have been 10 years old. I mean, they're not even trying, y'all. They're like not even trying. Wow, Teresa, thank you so much for the what are we calling these? Donation? I can't remember what the name is for these. Thank you for keeping the home campfires burning. I try as best I can. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you all of you who are hanging out with me today. So again, I mean, these fabrications, they're suggesting that these people were terrorists at the age of 10 and they have the documents to corroborate that. I mean, again, they're not even trying, y'all. They're not even trying with these lies because they don't have to. And as I recently pointed out in one of my own podcasts called Radical Nuance, this is psychology 101. Why would you change abusive behavior if you get rewarded for that behavior? So if you amplify that, why would you change genocidal behavior if you get rewarded for that behavior? And I recently saw a report by the IMEU that shows that the US taxpayers have paid for 70% of the destruction in Gaza. So basically, the US is not complicit in genocide. They are collaborating with genocide, or even more so making it possible, because it wouldn't be possible without the US. And I'll get to some points on that later as to what could Biden possibly have done, noting some precedent that actual US presidents have used in the past, which might be shocking. But quoting more from this article about journalists, in a war where international journalists have not been allowed to report from the ground, Al Jazeera and its international press groups say Israel appears intent on stifling reporting from its latest front. What they are trying to do is to conceal what's happening in north of Gaza, says Mohammed Mouawad, the managing editor of Al Jazeera's Arabic channel, noting that the Israeli military's allegations named all but one of the network's 7 remaining journalists in the north. Yeah, coincidence? I think not. There's no such thing. And I think it's really important, again, what's mentioned here. There have been no international journalists allowed in Gaza. And the CEO of the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, CBJ, Jody Ginsburg, said, "I think it's really important for people to understand how unprecedented that is. I have been working as a journalist for more than 2 decades. I have spoken to many war correspondents in that time, and none of them, having covered some of the most atrocious wars and genocides, can recall having been excluded entirely from a territory so completely and for such a long time." I mean, this is unprecedented, and it is, of course, not without purpose. That when you target journalists, and I know that I'm highlighting the death and the targeting of these journalists, not to try and suggest that their lives are more important than anyone else in Gaza, but why Israel is specifically targeting journalists and poets and people who speak very vocally about what's been happening in Gaza, because they are the ones that are getting the truth out. They are the only link that we have to what's going on in Gaza. And that's why it's so dangerous, because they can keep people out, but they can't keep the truth from escaping through live streams, through images, through things like that. It's been getting out and reaching people, and therefore not only causing more people to want to revolt against this genocide, but also giving more fodder, for instance, to like South Africa just delivered 750 pages to the UN, declaring that Israel is guilty of genocide. So all of this is what you need. You need you need evidence. These are the stories. This is the story of a culture trying to be eradicated by Israel. And so if you don't have these stories, then you will lose. And that's what Israel wants. They want this culture to disappear. But as long as the stories are coming out, as long as there are people there to tell those stories, That culture will never die. And that is dangerous to the Zionist project. That is dangerous to this genocidal project of ethnic cleansing that has been going on, not just since 1948, but that was when the mandate happened, but even since before then. So I think it's important to highlight the fact that these journalists are being targeted by Israel, and that they are being silenced in the most grotesque way. So again, just wanted to thank y'all for hanging out with me. For those just joining, I am not Lee Camp. That might be obvious. And Lee is in Tibet, and I am taking over for him hopefully a couple of times a week. I'll be hanging out with you in my own decrepit subway stop that has a subway car. That's where I keep my booze. Just kidding. I mean, how could I? It's a totally hypothetical subway car. Anyway, so I wanted to now get to something that kind of covers the uniqueness, the nothing newness. I'm struggling to find the right word for this. um, but this is a piece by Middle East Eye, which I definitely recommend that folks check out their reporting. They've done great reporting in terms of what's been happening in Gaza, and of course, as their name suggests, the Middle East for quite some time. And the article is by Joseph Massad. Don't let his name turn you off. It's not that Massad. And he writes, Israeli atrocities are nothing new. The only novelty is the scale. He writes, the ongoing and simultaneous Israeli aggression in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran, yes, all of those, strike many as exceptional and unprecedented. Israeli attacks targeting civilian airports, hospitals, schools, and shelters are thought to be the work of an extremist right-wing leadership spearheaded by Netanyahu that the country has never perpetrated before. Likewise, settler violence across the West Bank and settler invasions of Al-Aqsa Mosque are seen as novel provocations and violations that previous rational Israeli governments would never have allowed or at least sought to seriously limit. And he says, but none of this is true. And this speaks, I think, also to the importance of recognizing the situation that I think almost everybody understands that nothing started on October 7th, right? I think that feels pretty clear at this point. But I think what isn't clear is how kind of run of the mill a lot of this is, and how the escalation is an escalation that shows its roots, as opposed to an escalation that's like, oh my gosh, I could never have imagined this happening. If you look at the history of the Zionist ethno-state of Israel, then this feels like this was always going to happen, right? This was the foregone conclusion. This is what was written in their founding documents, right? So I think I think it's important to recognize. I recommend that people check out. I mean, there are lots of books. Edward Said has written a lot of books, but there's one called the 100-Year War, 100-Year Wars on Palestine, that I think is a great book that really documents by Khalidi, that really documents the history, that nothing started on October 7th. Nothing even started in 1948, actually. It goes back even further. And again, in this article, he points out that Israeli Labor Party leaders committed similar Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity that were horrific to mostly the Arab world, because a lot of it didn't get out. And in fact, in the 100-Year War on Palestine, in that book, he talks about how he went to an Israeli or an anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist protest in like the 70s, and there were like 2 people there, and they were Palestinian. And you compare that to today, the information has gotten out there. And of course, especially after October 7th, Israel finds it more and more difficult. But I would argue even with the previous onslaughts on Gaza and what they called mowing the lawn, which is what Israel calls it when they carpet bomb Gaza to keep the population down. I'd say even after that happened, in 2008 and whatnot, it's been more and more difficult for Israel to suggest that it's the victim. And yet it keeps playing that card, right? And our government continues to uphold that really terroristic myth. But he gives some examples. After the 1967 war, Israel violently suppressed protests against its conquest of 3 Arab countries. The Israeli occupiers attacked people in Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai daily, shooting, killing, beating, and arresting them and destroying thousands of their homes. They completely demolished Jerusalem's ancient Moroccan quarter and went on to level entire Palestinian villages to the ground. And so I recommend that you, because I'm not going to just read this article to you. That's not very interesting live streaming. But I recommend that y'all check out this article on Middle East Eye. It's by Joseph Massad, and it's again called "Israeli Atrocities Are Nothing New. The only novelty is the scale." And again, I think it's important to recognize that context, right? And how little of this information, again, with the, quote unquote, real, what is real journalism? Why wasn't this ever brought to our attention, right? Why wasn't this something that was reported on in 1967? Why do we talk about Hamas like it's something that is this Palestinian, just like it's something that's always existed? It didn't come into being until 40 years after the occupation. And I ask this question not because I have an answer to it or not because I'm suggesting people go do anything, but how long would you live under occupation? How long would you watch your friends, your family be beaten, murdered, arrested, jailed, oppressed before you started groups that sought to combat that? Quoting Malcolm X here, by any means necessary. And that is a question. May you answer it however you feel, but there is a lot of important context that is just not given when we talk about the Israeli occupation of Palestine that I think is really important. Is really important. I didn't even mean to do that. I'm taking a pause. Do you see that shameless self-promotion here? This is my own podcast that I do, called Radical Nuance. You can check it out either at patreon.com/artkillingapathy or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you again. Please do give a thumbs up, share it, whatever is, however you get it out there into the world, carrier pigeon, things like that. So I want to, looking at Israel, we have to also look at Israel's enabler, which of course initially was the UK. Now it is the US and has been for a very long time. So I wanted to share this image or this post. Let's see if that's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So this post, let me make that a little bit bigger. Whoop. No, yes. Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Biden and Kamala, this is a great account, by the way, on Twitter, at Push Biden Left. Basically, you can't. And they do great stuff. But it says Biden and Kamala are spending over 18 times more of our money on causing this problem than they are spending on fixing it. And below that is are two screenshots. One shows a headline that reads, "The U.S. has sent record $18 billion in military aid to Israel in past year at a minimum." That's from October 7th, 2024. That's a Truth Out article. And then USAID.gov shows that today's funding brings the total U.S. humanitarian assistance announced for the Palestinian people to more than $1 billion since October 2023. I can't help but wonder if they're also including that pier that they built in Gaza to not deliver aid, but to actually send U.S. troops to massacre people in a refugee camp. I wonder if that's included in their $1 billion of aid. I don't know. But either way, at the bare minimum, they are spending over 18 times more of the money causing the problem than they are fixing it. And one might wonder, well, is that something that the US does? So I just took the liberty of doing like a little searching to find out if that's something that we've done in the past. And I guess I should be honest, this is something that I had covered in the past, so I already kind of had it in my brain. But so let's look at Iraq. Contractors reap $138 billion from Iraq war. That's a Financial Times article. And then a CBS News article says, much of the $60 billion from the U.S. to rebuild Iraq wasted. So, okay, so contractors alone got $138 billion dollars from the Iraq war. That's not what was spent, by the way. That's not the money that was spent by the Pentagon. That was money that was just gotten by contractors, military contractors. Now, 60 billion was sent to quote unquote rebuild Iraq, which also in classic US fashion did not do the thing that they said they were going to do. And of course, they say in the first line of this report, 10 years and $60 billion in American taxpayer funds later, Iraq is still so unstable and broken that even its leaders question whether US efforts to rebuild the war-torn nation were worth the cost. Answer: no. To quote, I'm going to kind of butcher this quote, but to quote Eduardo Galeano, an Uruguayan author, anytime the US tries to save a nation, they either turn it into a cemetery or an insane asylum. And oftentimes, I would say both. Um, and this is exactly what they did with Iraq. What the US did with Iraq is completely decimate it and then throw like in comparison pennies to try and quote unquote rebuild it, but of course in a very Christian fashion, in their own image, right? In their own image, as the United States empire sees itself as God, I want to construct and rebuild this nation in my own image, right? So not like, here, you take the money, you do what you think is best. So sorry about that horrific war that was totally pointless. No, of course not. The US does not spend money on anything that it does not have total control over. So, and that's the same thing with the humanitarian aid, right? The US could just demand that Israel open up the borders to Gaza and let the hundreds of aid trucks in. Does it do that? No. It builds some useless fucking pier that it can use to throttle US soldiers into a refugee camp to kill people to supposedly save like 4 people. That totally makes sense. And that is the US MO. And Iraq is of course not the only example of that. Let's see here. US spending on Afghanistan reconstruction at risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. And this is from 2021. A report has shown that the US government has spent about $141 billion on reconstruction in Afghanistan since 2002. And I don't know if y'all know this, but that means the US government spent $141 billion just on reconstruction in order to make sure that the Taliban was still in power. So, and that's just the money spent on reconstruction. That is not the amount of money spent on the war itself. And in terms of that collective shit show, costs of the 20-year war on terror, $8 trillion and 900,000 deaths. This is a report from Brown University. I'd say it's more than 900,000 deaths. $8 trillion. It's probably more than that too, if you include the dark money and things like that. But $8 trillion, I mean, your brains can't even like begin to fathom that amount of money, right? $8 trillion is so much money. I mean, like it just, I mean, I'm not even, I will say my brain can't fathom it, but I also don't do math, so I'm not good at math. But there are these explanations, like you'd have to work if you started working at a rate of $100,000 an hour when Jesus was born, and you saved all of that money, there would still be like 9 people in the U.S. that are more wealthy than you. So that, and those are just billionaires. So $8 trillion, and for what? Obviously, the war on terror has created more terrorism, mostly from the US side of things, right? Just kind of like the war on drugs created more drug problems, more health problems in general, and the war on homelessness. Yeah, I mean, y'all get it, But this is, I bring this up to show that what the US is doing with regards to Israel, what the US is doing with regards to helping Palestine, which is laughable, is bullshit, and it was always going to be bullshit because this is what the US has done and always does do in terms of helping nations. Again, as what Eduardo Galeano put it, anytime the US tries to save a nation, they end up turning it into either an insane asylum or a cemetery. And I'm adding to that quote, I'd say both. So I want to thank y'all again for hanging out with me. I'm sorry that I'm not getting to a lot of your comments here because I'm still getting my feet wet, I guess. What is that? What is the etymology of that idiom? I am I'm still getting used to running this show on my own. So, let's see. Okay. But yeah, please do keep talking amongst yourselves, and I will try to look at some of the comments, but things happen so fast, and I'm trying to figure it out. It's also really warm under these lights, and I feel like it's warmer when you're here alone, which I'm not sure how that works in a physics sense. But now I wanted to get to, I wanted to get, oh, actually, I did want to share one. I don't know if I can do this. Share screen. No, I'll do that later. I wanted to see if I could share an art show that I'm helping to organize here in Baltimore, with all of the proceeds going to Gazan artists. It's an art show, totally like only of Gazan artists, and I wanted to see if I could bring that up, but I don't know that I can. Oh wait, haha. Okay, so here we go. Let's see here. So I just wanted to share this with y'all real quick because this is something that's happening here in Baltimore. If y'all are familiar with Red Emma's, it's a radical co-op in Baltimore, and they're going to be hosting this gallery show of art from Gazan artists to benefit Gazan artists that'll be up from November 5th through December 1st. My goal is that once we've got these up in a physical space, that I can also create a website to house this art and then get all of those proceeds to go to those artists in Gaza as well. So please, if you are in the Baltimore area, do check this out. There will be a reception on November 21st. If you're not, please let folks know about it. And you can follow me at Radical Eleanor for more information about that. But again, I'm going to also try to get that information up online, or the prints up online, so that people can purchase them there. Anyway, moving on, kind of. I wanted to get to this story that's from The Intercept. Why do Dick Cheney and his ilk support Kamala? Do Kamala Harris's neocon supporters just hate Trump, or is there something more to her appeal? And this is by Ada Chavez over at The Intercept. And she writes, these hawks say they're endorsing Harris largely to stop Donald Trump, citing his conduct and quote unquote chaotic leadership. I don't know what you'd call Dick Cheney's, but these prominent conservatives are backing the Democratic nominee because their visions for U.S. foreign policy increasingly appear to be aligned. The Democratic and Republican parties are more unified than ever in their commitment to preserving American hegemony and preventing the multipolar world from emerging. If y'all were hanging out with Lee and I this past Friday, will know that we covered BRICS, the BRICS summit, and the rise of the continued rise, I should say, of the multipolar world, and how the U.S. propaganda machine, not least of all the New York Times, sounded like some kind of soap opera-esque, jealous, scorned lover, like, oh, it was nothing. It was a terrible summit. Nobody showed up, and it was bullshit, and it was just totally lame. Like, no, it was actually a lot. The majority of the world's large economies were there. You weren't, because you're assholes, and they're going to circumvent your bullshittery and your assholery. So yeah, I'd say if you have only American bank accounts, you might want to look into that, folks, because the U.S. empire is crumpling. So she continues, as Vice President Cheney was one of the principal architects not only of the Iraq War, which left hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead, but also the US's worldwide torture regime. The aftershocks of America's 8-year occupation are still being felt in the region and in our domestic policies to this day. Former Representative Liz Cheney, who inherited her father's hawkish views, has also pledged to do whatever she can to elect Harris, including launching a PAC that has raised millions of dollars to boost the Democrats' campaign. I mean, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with this. I think it's actually from the Second World War, but it's like a fun little quote that goes, "What do you call a guy sitting at a table with 10 Nazis? 11 Nazis." So you're the company that you keep. And if the company that you keep is Dick Cheney, we're not going to get this won't work out, you know? And far from bucking that kind of support, far from saying like, actually, you know what, Dick Cheney, take your take your applause for my campaign and shove it. She has accepted it with open arms and been so happy, so stoked about his support and a bunch of other Republicans, to the point that she was giving an interview, or she was talking to Fox News not long after she had appeared on stage with like 100 Republican lawmakers. And she had told Fox News, look, I'm going to be open to a lot of ideas once I'm president, ideas like from Republican lawmakers and from the business sector and others. That's a quote. You can look it up. Republican lawmakers and the business sector and others. Totally absent from who she would take advice from were her own party, first off. So if you thought there was any difference, but also remarkably absent from who she would take advice from, the people. Not at any point did she say, you know what, I give a flying fuck what the people think. At no point did she say that. No point. And of course, to quote Biden, nothing will fundamentally change. And it hasn't. So I guess in that sense, it's really nice that he stood by his word. I mean, we did see a genocide happen, so that's I guess that's something that did change, but really not in the way that people were hoping it would when they voted for Biden, I'm assuming. And if you want to hear more about my thoughts on voting and that whole shit show, you can check out a recent episode that I did of Radical Nuance, where it's called "What's in a Vote," and it basically talks about what the hell does your vote mean in this, in this facade of democracy, this mirage democracy that we have. But the Intercept article continues here and points out that the Harris campaign isn't just courting moderates and conservatives as part of a short-term strategy to win the election. Democrats are actively supporting and spouting neocon ideas. Yeah, no shit. During her keynote address at the Democratic National Convention, Harris vowed, quote, "As commander-in-chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world." Wow. And I know you probably already heard of that because Lee covered it months ago. But of course, that's her stance, because at the same time, she's ensuring, and her party are blocking any Palestinian Americans from appearing on the convention stage to speak about Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, and of course, stopping that genocide from ending. The party's 2024 platform also reflects this rightward shift. A section from the 2020 platform on ending forever wars and opposing regime change was completely removed in 2024. Now, I should take this moment to remind people that the Democratic Party platform has always meant bupkis in terms of what the Democrats do. They always just do whatever the hell they want, and the party platform is there as basically, it's like a nice little storybook to hand people and be like, hey, we care. And then we're not going to do anything here. Like all of the things listed here, like we're not going to do any of that. But like, it sounds nice, doesn't it? Like it sounds really cool. Like we give a shit about y'all. We don't. So the Democratic Party platform has never really meant much, but the fact that now they're even pulling any kind of, like, any kind of mention of ending foreign wars, the fact that they're even pulling that from the platform, I mean, yeah, that is, yeah, hope and change and joy, right? Joy is the new one. Yeah. I'm so joyful at this, that the forever wars. That's really great. Thanks, Kamala. The Democratic Party went from calling for an end to U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's brutal war in Yemen to championing the Biden administration's plan for a normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, a plan that could also put American lives on the line to protect the Saudi dictatorship for decades to come. And lest we forget, US troops are in the Middle East. I mean, obviously they're in the Middle East, but they're in Israel and they've actually, taken selfies with Netanyahu and things like that. And it's like, okay, so not only are we materially funding this genocide in terms of money and weapons, but now we have the boots on the ground. That's great. Great. Well done. And of course, now, as Ida Chavez writes in this article, this kind of tight knit connection with Saudi could mean that American troops are going to give their lives for Saudi Arabia because I don't know. Yeah, you tell me. So, and I bring this up again because the title of this stream today is "It's Nothing New for the Evil Empire," and I think, like, there's, as I like to do with my nuance on topics, I just covered that up. Now, nuance on topics. I think it's important to say that as a nation founded on genocide and slavery are obviously nothing new to the United States empire, right? And an empire always stretches itself outwards and attacks itself inwards. That's how all empires do until they eventually collapse. And this is what's happening with the US empire, not just economically vis-a-vis BRICS, but also in very material ways as well. So, but I think it's important to note that, yes, this has always been the case, but we are seeing that escalate and, accelerate in recent times, to the point that you can actually look back at conservatives of the olden days and see how differently they dealt with, for instance, Israel. So I wanted to share that with y'all here. This is a post by the IMEU Policy Project. They do great work. And it says Biden could have ended Israel's violence in Gaza with a phone call other presidents have. And so, of course, this they start off by pointing out that, yeah, the Biden administration and, their little, like, Disney villain, uh, talking heads at the press meetings will oftentimes say, well, we're doing everything we can. We're trying so hard. And, President Biden said that there's every reason to believe that Netanyahu is delaying a ceasefire in order to stay in power. And yet Biden has refused to use the most fundamental leverage he has to get a ceasefire, which is cutting off billions of dollars of weapons to Israel. So, in 1982, President Ronald Reagan. I mean, it's at that point, y'all. It's at that point where I am talking about President Ronald Reagan in a positive way. Like, how fucking topsy-turvy is our world where this is reality, where I'm like, but Reagan. It's dark times, isn't it? So, Reagan called then Israeli Prime Minister Begin to demand that he end Israel's brutal siege of Beirut, with Reagan reportedly saying, Menachem, this is a Holocaust. Israel stopped its attacks on Beirut 20 minutes later. 20 minutes. Who's nuts in a salad shooter? I mean, this is so clear cut. Israel cannot do anything unless the US says so. The idea that Israel could have done Any of this since October 7th and before is just dumb without US support. So, again, I really hate to point out that Reagan did something good, but here we are. This is the absurdist reality that we live in. And it's also a really stark, like a really stark showcasing of how far right our government is. I mean, lest we forget, recently Italy just banned all weapon sales to Israel. And now Italy, for those who aren't aware, their prime minister is a self-identifying neo-Nazi, a self-identifying fascist. Like, not just other people call her that. Like, she's like, no, 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 I own it. So here we are, a openly neo-Nazi fascist government in Italy is further left than the Biden administration. Okay. I'm just going to leave that there. And Reagan is further left than Biden. So, hey, uh, war is peace. I mean, Orwell would have, I just feel him rolling in his grave. After Israel attacked and occupied Gaza and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula in 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower threatened Israel with multilateral sanctions. Israel then withdrew its forces. Other presidents have also withheld funding to Israel as leverage. I can't believe that I am doing this, but I'm going to say something positive about President H.W. Bush. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush withheld $10 billion in loan guarantees to Israel in order to pressure Israel to stop using U.S. funds towards its illegal theft of Palestinian land. I should have put bourbon in this before I started. As it stands, it's just chai tea, and that's not going to cut it for me saying positive things about Reagan and Bush in the same fucking live stream. President Harry Truman refused to ship a single weapon to Israel during the Nakba out of concern for the violence Israel inflicted on Palestinians. Since 1948, however, the U.S. has provided more than $141 billion in weapons to Israel. Historically, Israel only stopped its violence toward Palestinians and Lebanese when the U.S. threatens to or does stop the weapons from flowing. So, clearly, and I will say that's to soften my own anguish at saying positive things about Reagan and Bush. Things obviously didn't end, right? Since 1948, $141 billion has gone from the US to Israel. And even if you were just domestically interested, even if you didn't give a damn about the Palestinians, which a lot of people don't, what could the United States people do with $141 billion? I bet you our subways wouldn't look this shitty. I mean, this isn't a real subway, but you get my point, right? I mean, if anybody has taken the New York subway, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, what could our infrastructure look like if we weren't so busy destroying the infrastructure and lives of Palestinians? Not just Palestinians, but of course, as I've shown in this live stream, Iraqis, Afghanistan. I didn't even get into Vietnam or Korea. I mean, good Lord, like it is the amount of money and time and effort spent killing, maiming, oppressing, and destroying peoples and their governments is legion. I mean, other empires wish they could. The US definitely, I mean, the US empire is exceptional in that sense. Nobody has done it like the US empire has. So, I mean, yeah, hats off in that sense. But again, like this is something that has been done. Like the precedent has been set. The precedent has been set in the past where presidents have called a fucking phone call. That's all it takes. You don't even have to get up off your ass. You can just lift up a fucking phone. Like I don't have a phone. Who the fuck has a phone anymore? But like a phone in the Oval Office. Make one fucking phone call and the massacring of children, of fucking babies would end. It would end in 20 minutes. And even if you didn't do that, if you just stopped, if you just said no more weapons shipments, it would take a matter of days alone for Israel to no longer have the ability to do genocide. That's it. That's all you would have to do. Essentially nothing. All you would have to do is nothing, right? And yet that is too much. It is too much. And it's not just, of course, because the US loves Israel. The US doesn't love anything. An empire cannot love. It is incapable of doing something so human and so precious. No, 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 no. It's because Israel protects US hegemony. Israel protects US interests. The US doesn't really give a damn about Israel as an entity. The US only gives a damn in terms of its own interests. And indeed, Winston Churchill, because the UK passed the baton in terms of Israel to the US. Winston Churchill himself said that the creation of Israel aligns with British Empire interests. He said that. And that has not changed. It's only that the empire has changed, right? Instead of the British Empire, now it's the US Empire, and it aligns with US interests. And that's why Reagan, Bush, Truman, Eisenhower, that's why none of them would go the extra step and say, actually, you know what? Like, it's not only fucked what you're doing now, it's fucked that you exist. Like, it's just, like, you shouldn't be allowed to exist. They can't do that. Not only because Israel promotes and protects US interests and is a foothold for US hegemony in the region, but also because Israel is a mirror. It's a very twisted funhouse mirror of US existence. And if Israel doesn't have a right to exist, maybe the US doesn't either. As a genocidal state, as a genocidal nation state founded on the genocide of indigenous peoples and slavery, maybe the US doesn't have a right to exist. Maybe nation states in general don't have a right to exist because entities such as nation states don't have rights. People do. But that is some shit that they certainly do not want people to think about. And they certainly don't want that to come to the US and start making its way, percolating through the unwashed and oppressed masses from Appalachia to Washington State, back to DC and over to San Diego. You do not want that shit spreading. That would be very dangerous. So planting that seed, unless I'm assuming a lot of you already had that plant well grown in your own minds, but in case, planting that seed right there. So I'm actually going to wrap a little early today partially because it's hot as balls under these lights. I have to figure out I don't know how Lee does it. And he's usually got like a long sleeve shirt and a vest, and it doesn't look like he's schwitzing like I am. I mean, good Lord, I am. Whew. But I wanted to thank y'all for hanging out with me. I also just wanted to, again, like, wrap everything up here with this. It's nothing new for the evil empire. It's nothing new for the evil empire to fund, to create, to manifest, to collaborate in genocide. There's also precedent to say no, at least in the immediate mayhem, right? Biden could easily pick up the phone and end it, and he won't, and neither will Harris. And I think it's very important to recognize that, especially with the people that Harris is surrounding herself with and saying who she wants to take ideas from, right? So please do continue to share this and let folks know that you enjoyed this. I'm going to try to come back another time this week, possibly Thursday, if y'all want to do like a Halloween episode, get kind of scary with the news, because it is very, very scary. What else? In the meantime, please feel free to let me know how you felt about this, if it was good, if there's something that you think that I should change, or like if Lee does something when you all hang out that I didn't do. I know that this isn't streaming to locals and Rumble because I don't have the special password thing that he does. So, um, but yeah, if there's anything, please feel free to reach out to me. All of my work can be found at artkillingapathy.com. That includes podcasts that I do, whether that's Radical Nuance or Project Censored. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you same time, same channel, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And in the meantime, I guess I'll have to say goodbye, right? I don't usually say goodbye, but I'll borrow a line from Lee and say thanks so much for watching, y'all, and keep fighting.